My phone lit up at 11:47 that night with a notification for $15,800 charged to Aegean Travel. I am Grace Sterling, a chief compliance officer, so I know exactly what fraud looks like. That morning, my father had announced a Santorini trip for just the five of us. He had exploited a legacy recovery key I had shared with him years ago for a family emergency, essentially hijacking my professional credentials to fund a vacation I was not even invited on. My corporate-backed elite credit line, reserved strictly for business travel, was now a digital hostage in his hands. Have you ever realized someone you loved only valued you for your utility? Drop a comment and let me know your location and time. I am curious to see how far this story travels. The Palo Alto mansion always smelled like lavender and expensive silence. It was the kind of house where everything looked perfect from the street, a carefully maintained facade of Silicon Valley success. That morning, the sunlight was streaming into the dining room, hitting the white marble countertops with a precision that felt almost clinical. My mother, Stephanie, was sitting at the head of the table, her movements as fluid and practiced as a performer. I watched her butter a piece of artisanal sourdough, her focus entirely on the evenness of the spread. To anyone else, it was just breakfast. To me, it was the first blueprint of my erasure. My father, Frank, set his phone down next to his espresso. He did not look at me when he spoke. He looked at the family as a unit that I was simply orbiting. "We have booked the trip," he announced, his voice carrying that familiar weight of a man used to being obeyed. "Santorini, a private villa on the Caldera, 10 days of pure perfection. Since Ashley is already in Europe for her semester abroad, she'll be meeting the four of you at the villa. It's a perfect plan for the five of you." My brother Tyler and his fiancée Cassandra were already leaning in, their eyes bright with the reflected glow of high-end travel brochures. They were talking about the vibe of the place, the infinity pools, and where they would take the best photos for their social media followers. I sat at the far end of the table, my tea cooling in front of me. I waited for my name to be mentioned. I waited for a flight time or a question about my schedule. Instead, Stephanie looked up from her toast and gave me a smile that did not reach her eyes. "We thought it over, Grace, and we decided it is best if you stay back this time. You are always so busy with your numbers and your compliance reports. We did not want to stress you out with a hectic itinerary. You understand, right? You understand, right?" It was not a question. It was a verbal contract they expected me to sign with my silence. Tyler gave a tiny shrug, the kind of dismissive gesture he had perfected over years of being the golden child. "Yeah, Grace, you would probably just be checking work emails the whole time anyway. It is better this way. Just the five of us." The math of that sentence was brutal. There are 6 people in this family, but in their calculations, I had been moved from the asset column to the overhead. For years, I had been the one who balanced the books. I paid $12,000 for Stephanie's medical deductible when her insurance stalled. I covered $80,000 of Tyler's personal guarantees when his first startup collapsed, money he used to fund a failing lifestyle while pretending to be a Silicon Valley disruptor. I was the daughter who funded the emergencies, the one who provided the stability they all stood on. I realized then that they did not want me there because I was the reminder of the cost. They wanted the luxury without the person who provided it. They said I was too busy with numbers to go, but they had already helped themselves to my numbers to make it happen. My corporate-backed elite credit line was already saved in my father's iPad. A digital ghost waiting to be summoned. I did not argue. I did not scream. I just watched them discuss the wine tours and the yacht rentals, realizing that my compassion had become a luxury they had overdrafted for years. I finished my tea, stood up, and left for work, letting them believe the foundation was still secure. I did not cry. I did not ask why. I just sat on the edge of my bed, the cold blue light of my phone illuminating the wreckage of my trust. My hands were perfectly steady. As a compliance officer, I spend my days identifying risks and mitigating damage. Tonight, the risk was my own blood, and the damage was years of being used as an interest-free loan. I opened my laptop, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was actually doing my job at home. This was not a breakdown, it was an audit. I started with the authorized users, Frank and Tyler. One click and their access to my high-limit elite corporate line was gone. I did not just freeze the card, I reported the $15,800 charge as unauthorized. Then I moved to the rewards portal. My father had been planning to use my business class points to fly everyone over the Atlantic in reclining seats. I revoked the transfer. If they wanted to reach Greece, they could pay for it with their own money or sit in coach. Next came the passwords. I changed them all. The family streaming accounts, the hotel loyalty profiles, the airport lounge memberships, and the rental car apps. I turned on two-factor authentication, tethering every account to my phone alone. I was reclaiming my digital identity, one character at a time. It felt like cutting the strings on a marionette that had finally decided to walk on its own. For years, my compliance had been an invisible chain. I used my money to buy a fragile peace, thinking if I was useful enough, I would finally be loved enough. It was a prison without bars, where the currency of my freedom was my own exploitation. I had been the silent investor in their version of family, footing the bill for a performance I was not allowed to join. But that ended tonight. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years, and now the account was closed. Around 12:20, my phone buzzed. A declined charge alert. $1,450. Hotel suite upgrade in Florence. I stared at the word declined and felt a sharp, clinical satisfaction. It was not a happy smile. It was the look of a locked door, finally keeping the right people out. They were still trying to build their dream on my foundation, and they had no idea the ground had just disappeared. Another notification pinged. $620 for a luggage delivery service, declined. Then, $389 for travel insurance, declined. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a shred of regret, but there was only clarity. I was not ruining their trip. I was just no longer available to fund it. I put my phone face down and lay back against the pillows. Inside, my laptop glowed with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. I was not walking away from my family. I was walking away from the bill. I spent the rest of that night submerged in the blue light of my laptop, performing the most important audit of my life. In my world, numbers do not have feelings. They do not have excuses, and they certainly do not have blood ties. They are just cold, hard data points that tell a story of where the value is going. I exported 4 years of financial statements, Venmo histories, and emergency wire transfers into one single master file. I titled it The Sterling Family Audit. When the final cell calculated the total, I felt a strange clinical detachment. $141,000. Every cent of that total was drained from my personal post-tax savings money I earned through 80-hour work weeks and missed holidays. I had been subsidizing their Silicon Valley lifestyle with my own survival fund, thinking my generosity would eventually buy their love. I stared at the breakdown. $12,000 for my mother's surgery deductible, which I paid because Frank claimed his liquidity was tied up in high-yield assets. $80,000 across 3 separate business loans to Tyler Money he used to fund a failing lifestyle while pretending to be a Silicon Valley disruptor. $28,000 for Ashley's final year of tuition and board. because apparently my success was a communal pool that everyone was allowed to swim in except me. And then there was the remaining $21,000 in miscellaneous bridge loans to my father, money for house repairs, property taxes, and dues for the country club he refused to resign from. I realized then that for my entire adult life, I had been caught in the survivalist's invisible chains. I had been living in a prison without bars, where the only way to earn a moment of peace was to be the person who fixed everyone else's mistakes. It is a specialized kind of psychological trap, the fawn response. I was terrified of being the disappointment, the one who was not team-oriented. So I used my bank account to buy a fragile sense of safety. I thought if I was useful enough, I would eventually be loved for who I was, not just for what I could provide. I had spent 30 years translating their exploitation into loyalty. I had convinced myself that paying for Tyler's bad decisions was supporting my brother, and covering my mother's bills was being a good daughter. But looking at the spreadsheet, the truth was undeniable. Love without respect is just a subscription service you never agreed to, and my family had been charging me a premium for years. I was the chief resource, a human capital asset they managed for their own growth. They did not see Grace Sterling the person. They saw Grace Sterling the high-limit credit line. Every time I had hit confirm on a transfer, I thought I was building a bridge to them. Instead, I was just funding the wall they used to keep me out. I was not an investor in this family. I was the silent partner footing the bill for a luxury lifestyle I was never invited to live. I closed the laptop, my heart as still as a frozen account. The audit was complete. The justification for everything I was about to do sat in that folder. Clear, factual, and lethal. My father always told me that family comes first. Tonight, I finally understood what he meant. He meant that I was always meant to be the one who finished last. I walked into the kitchen at 7 a.m., and the expensive silence of the previous day had been replaced by a frantic digital heartbeat. My father was at the head of the table, his navy robe tied tight, staring at his phone as if he could intimidate the screen into obedience. Every few seconds, a sharp metallic ping echoed through the room. It was the sound of a $32,000 dream vacation collapsing in real time. Hotel booking expired, private tour canceled. Reservation released. Frank did not look up when I pulled out a chair. His face was a deep, mottled red. "Grace," he said, his voice vibrating with a restrained fury that used to make my lungs lock up. "I just got 5 emails from the travel agency. They are saying the payment method is invalid, that there is a fraud hold." He finally looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "You need to call them. Now, tell them it was a mistake." I took a slow, deliberate breath and set my phone on the table. "It was not a mistake, Frank. I filed the dispute myself." The room went dead. Tyler and Cassandra were standing by the breakfast bar, surrounded by their designer luggage, looking like they had been slapped. My mother, Stephanie, set down the teapot with a trembling hand. "Victoria Grace," she whispered, using my full name as if the weight of it could crush my resolve. "How could you be so incredibly selfish? This trip was for your brother, for his engagement celebration. You are embarrassing your father in front of his future daughter-in-law. It was a masterclass in the trap of cruelty normalization. In this house, my exploitation had become a standardized business practice. They did not see themselves as thieves because, in their minds, my resources were not mine. They were family assets that I was simply holding in trust for their enjoyment. Over years of covering their emergencies, I had accidentally trained them to view my labor as a natural resource, like air or water, something they were entitled to consume without gratitude or consent. The cruelty had become so routine that it was invisible to them. They were not shocked by what they had done. They were only shocked that I had stopped providing the service. Stephanie moved toward me, her voice shifting into that high, sweet register she reserved for professional manipulation. "Grace, honey, your father is under a terrible amount of pressure. His business has been slow. We just wanted 1 week of peace. Open the card just for the villa deposit, and we will sit down and talk about everything when we get back, for the sake of the family." I looked at her, then at the designer luggage sitting by the door. "No," I said. It was just one word, 2 letters, but it felt like an iron wall. Frank slammed his hand onto the table, making the silverware jump. "You ungrateful little brat. We raised you. We gave you everything, and you are going to destroy this entire family over a credit card?" "I am not destroying the family, Dad," I said, standing up. "I am just no longer available to fund the performance. If you want Santorini, you will have to use your own money to get there." I picked up my keys and walked out, leaving them standing in the wreckage of a luxury life they could no longer afford to rent. I did not go to my desk when I reached the office. Instead, I headed straight for the secure records room where Natalie Brooks was already waiting, with 2 extra-large coffees and a grim expression. Natalie is the only person who understands that in the world of high-stakes compliance, a missing comma can be a mistake, but a hidden guarantor is a declaration of war. I needed her eyes, the eyes of a professional who had not spent 30 years trying to love the suspect. We sat in the hum of the server room, the air-conditioned chill biting at my skin, as we began a deep-dive audit into every account my father had ever touched. We spent 3 hours peeling back the layers of my authorized user history. As a chief compliance officer, I have access to verification logs that a regular consumer would never see. As a CCO, I have a fiduciary duty to report any breach of corporate resources. If I didn't file this report, I wouldn't just lose my job. I'd be an accomplice to a felony. Using my administrative forensics clearance, we pulled the server logs and the encrypted digital handshake from the loan application. We were not just looking for travel charges anymore, we were looking for the shadow. We found it at 10:32 a.m., tucked inside a dormant business credit file I had not looked at in 6 months. It was a digital signature verification for a bridge loan, a business loan for $45,000. My name was listed as the sole guarantor. I stared at the screen until the pixels felt like needles. The document claimed I had electronically signed the guarantee on the 14th of last month, using my professional title and corporate credentials to bypass the bank's standard vetting process. My father had not just stolen a vacation, he had stolen my professional identity. He had forged my signature to bail out his failing consulting firm, betting my entire career and my freedom on a loan he had no intention of paying back. If the firm defaulted, and looking at his recent declines, I would not just be broke. I would be legally liable for professional fraud. "Grace," Natalie whispered, her voice matching the coldness of the room. "This is not family drama. This is a felony. This is a 3rd-degree forgery and identity theft." I did not flinch. I did not feel the familiar sting of tears. I felt a sharp, crystalline silence settle over my heart. This was the kill shot. My father had calculated that my loyalty was so absolute, my fawning response so predictable, that I would go to jail before I would hold him accountable. He had traded my life for $45,000 of debt. I pulled out my phone and took a high-resolution photo of the forged signature. Then, I downloaded the metadata, the IP address used to sign the document. It traced back directly to the old iPad in the Palo Alto house. The betrayal had reached a level where there was no path back to reconciliation. In my world, once a risk becomes a certainty, you do not manage it anymore. You eliminate it. I looked at Natalie and nodded once. I was not just walking away from the bill anymore. I was walking toward a police report. I spent the next hour drafting a formal affidavit, my language clinical and lethal. By the time I hit save, the daughter who wanted to be loved was officially dead. The chief compliance officer was the only one left in the room. I walked back into the Palo Alto house at 6 p.m. sharp. I carried my laptop like a weapon. The living room was a landscape of half-packed suitcases and high-end anxiety. Stephanie was sitting on the edge of the cream-colored sofa, her face blotchy from crying. Tyler was on his phone, his voice hushed and desperate as he pleaded with a credit card representative. Frank stood by the fireplace, the lord of a manor built on shifting sand. I did not wait for an invitation. I walked to the 75-inch television and connected the cable. The screen flickered to life, washing the room in the clinical glow of my spreadsheets. "Enough," I said. The room went silent. Frank turned, his eyes searching for the old Grace, the one he could bully into silence. He did not find her. "Look at the screen," I commanded. I scrolled through the first page of the Sterling family audit. $141,000. I highlighted the $12,000 for the medical deductible. I underlined the $28,000 for Ashley's tuition. I circled the $80,000 in business loans to Tyler. "This was my loyalty," I said, my voice matching the coldness of the data. "This was the subscription price for a family that did not even want me at their table." Then I clicked on the shadow loan file, the $45,000 business guarantee. The digital signature looked like mine, but the metadata showed an IP address from this very house. "This is a felony, Frank," I said. "Identity theft. Third-degree forgery. You gambled my career and my freedom to save a consulting firm that is already dead." I looked at them then, and the realization hit me like a physical wave. For 30 years, I had been afraid of their power. But as I stood in that room, I saw the truth. Their status and their arrogance were just a mask they had rented with my labor. It was the illusion of power via an empty wallet. They had no internal substance, no integrity to stand on. Once the stolen funds were cut off, the mask simply disintegrated. They were not powerful. They were just parasites who had run out of a host. Frank took a step toward me, his hands shaking. The lordly tone was gone. In its place was a naked, pathetic desperation. "Grace, listen to me. This forged loan was the collateral trigger for your existing lines of credit. Once you flagged it as fraud, the bank cross-defaulted your entire portfolio. The firm will collapse by Monday. We will be on the street. Please, honey, show us some mercy." I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila envelope. I set it on the coffee table, right next to the empty champagne glasses they had used to toast a trip paid for with fraud. "Mercy?" I asked. I watched Cassandra, Tyler's fiancée, look from the screen to the man she was supposed to marry. She looked disgusted, realizing her engagement ring had been funded by the very fraud displayed on the screen. She slowly twisted the diamond ring off her finger and set it on the table. "I already gave you $141,000 of mercy," I said to my father, "and you used it to buy a forgery." Inside that envelope is a notarized affidavit and a police case reference number for the felony identity theft report I filed 3 hours ago. Frank looked at the report and sank into his chair, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. He looked diminished, a man whose currency had finally been canceled. I picked up my laptop, walked out of the house, and did not look back. 48 hours later, the dream of Santorini was dead. The Sterling name, once synonymous with Palo Alto prestige and Silicon Valley success, had been reduced to a case file sitting on a detective's desk. My father's consulting firm was effectively shuttered, the glass doors locked, while a formal investigation into the $45,000 forged loan began its slow, methodical grind. Tyler's engagement did not end with a destination wedding. It ended with a returned ring and a silent house, Cassandra choosing her own reputation over a family built on stolen foundations. I did not stay to witness the collapse. I spent those 2 days in a hotel blocking every phone number that shared my last name. On Friday afternoon, I signed the lease on a one-bedroom apartment downtown. It was a modest space with high ceilings and a view of the river, but for the first time in my 30 years of life, I was the only person with a key. When Natalie Brooks helped me carry the final boxes up the stairs, we sat on the hardwood floor, eating takeout from paper containers. She raised a soda can to the empty room and said to not being budgeted in. I laughed, and for the first time in what felt like a decade, the sound did not feel like it was costing me anything. That night, I sat on my new balcony and opened my laptop. I was not auditing fraud or tracing IP addresses this time. I was looking at the coast of Portugal. I found a small boutique hotel in Lisbon with a balcony overlooking the Atlantic. I booked the flight using my own points and a card that only I controlled. When the bank alert pinged on my phone 3 seconds later, I did not feel my hands go cold. I smiled. This time, the charge was a choice. The seat was mine, and no one at breakfast had to decide if I belonged. I have come to realize that letting go of bloodlines is not an act of malice. It is an act of self-rescue. We are conditioned from birth to believe that family is an unconditional contract, a lifelong debt of loyalty that must be paid regardless of the cost to our own sanity. But the truth is, blood is just a biological fact. It does not give anyone a master key to your peace or a blank check for your future. There is a profound, painful difference between being loved and being useful. If your family only calls you when the bill is due or the crisis has hit, they have not raised a child. They have cultivated a resource. It is a difficult lesson to learn, but sometimes the most educational moment of your life is financial literacy wrapped inside emotional pain. Reclaiming your narrative means accepting that you might be the villain in their story for the crime of protecting your own. They will call your boundaries selfish because they benefited from your silence. They will call your records cruel because your memory threatens the lie they have lived for years. But you are not responsible for funding a performance you were never invited to join. If you are the person who is always expected to understand, to cover the cost, to forgive the unforgivable, and to stay quiet for the sake of the family image, I want you to remember this. Do not let your loyalty become someone else's password. Your worth is not a communal asset. It belongs to you alone. Forgiveness is not always about the other person. Sometimes it is just the process of clearing the ledger, so you can walk away with a zero balance and a full heart. If you have ever had to set a boundary that felt like a war, or if you are the one always expected to be the reliable one while others benefit, share your story in the comments. I want to know how you found your own version of the luxury of silence. Let us reclaim our narratives together. Thank you for being part of this journey. Do not forget to like and subscribe to join our community of those who choose to shine on their own terms.